How we doing, everyone? Welcome to another live edition of Seahawks Forever. Hope you're having a nice evening. Didn't realize it when I planned this, but turns out we are head-to-head with Game 6 of the NBA Finals tonight, so you're welcome for giving you something else to pay attention to during these dark times. Tonight we're going to talk money. Fans love to stress about the cap and their team's financial standing, and look, we live in this fantasy football-driven access for everyone world now where fans can be as educated and informed about this stuff as anyone. It's all online there for everyone to see. But comprehension, understanding all the ins and outs of it, different story. How much we really know about how the salary cap is administered and specifically how the Seahawks like to manage it. And for help with that today, we will do, as we do just about every year, and bring in cap expert Curtis Allen. You've read his work on the Seahawks draft blog with Rob Staten. And then we're going to discuss some specifics. Obviously, the Seahawks have a number of young players eligible for contract extensions at the moment. What would new deals potentially look like for Charles Cross, Kobe Bryant, Woolen, and potentially others? Would it behoove John Schneider to be aggressive and strike quickly on some of those deals, or maybe wait them out? Also tonight, I know I'm a little late in doing it, but we are finally, giving away the shirt. So those of you who are in on this, paid members of this page and paid members of Patreon, I've got your names ready to be picked today. We will do that tonight and give that shirt away. But mostly we are here to talk salary caps, Seahawks, and we're going to do that with Curtis Allen on the other side of the...
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Welcome back, everybody, and welcome back, Curtis. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing excellent, Dan. How about yourself?
Not too bad. I was just reading, and one of the reasons that I'm a couple minutes late getting on tonight is I was just reading about the impending heat wave that we're about to experience here. So lots of warnings from the landlord not to turn the AC too high. So that's fun. I have that to look forward to.
You sure you don't want to turn around and come back to Seattle?
I'll be back in a couple of weeks. So I guess this is just their way of saying, hey, we want you to remember us. And this is my first experience ever with any kind of significant humidity. So even though it's been in the 80s lately, it's a whole different ballgame. So I'm sure this next week, the good news is we have a pool, so we'll just get a lot of use out of that, right?
As long as Butch can handle the heat.
And he's getting ready for a cross-country road trip with me too. So
nice.
He's fine. He cools himself off. Let's do this. And we decided to go live today. So those of you that are watching, kind of save your questions because maybe we'll get to them and we'll answer some of them early on. And then that way I won't miss them as we go through some of this. But I kind of thought we would start I want to ask you about your broad view of just kind of the current status of the salary cap in the NFL and where it stands and how it's being managed, and maybe the potential future of it, where it's headed, but also do some cap 101 stuff, kind of go over some terms and some basics and things like that before we get into the specifics so that it's a lot more clear. Because again, as much as we all have access to this stuff, and so we think we understand it, it's really complicated when you get down to it. And there's a lot that goes into it, which is exactly the reason why teams all employ really, really smart people.
Mm-hmm.
Just to do this, right? Like it's Jennifer Garner in draft day. Like that was her only job.
Mm-hmm.
She just did the salary cap.
Yeah. She's a little better looking than me though. But
spends a little too much time in closets.
Yeah. It's definitely something that's gone on. I wrote an article about the change from Matt Thomas to Joey Lane, and
I want to get into that.
A couple of years, and the more it's one of those things where you start writing and then you start thinking about what's happened, and it's like it's this, and then it's this, and then it's this, and it's this, and so there's a pattern kind of weaved together. I think last year you asked me if there was an impact to him coming on and Matt Thomas moving on, and we were kind of talking about it's kind of early to tell.
Yeah.
Now it's not. We can see that there's definitely some changes that they've made. So understanding those changes and maybe looking to what may be coming down the road, to me is great fun. Certainly better than watching the non-Sonics in the Game 6 of the NBA Finals.
Right. And we're doing a public service for you. And in that way, yes. I can probably write off all the expense of having these lights on for tonight because we're doing it for you. Let's get into some of those basics then before we get into some of the nitty gritty. And first and foremost, let's address this because the Seahawks are being impacted by a very significant change, something we've never seen before this year in terms of signing draft picks. Mm-hmm. And we all know that the first round is different. They get the 5th-year option. Most first-round contracts, at least those handed out by teams not called the Cincinnati Bengals, are usually fully guaranteed. They're not as complex. They're a lot easier to negotiate. That's why you don't have the holdouts that you do anymore, unless you're the Cincinnati Bengals. But the second round has changed this year. And there's a reason that Nick Emenwari and Elijah Arroyo are the only 2 draft picks still unsigned by the Seahawks because of what happened with Carson Schwessinger in Cleveland and Jaden Higgins in Houston, right? They got their contracts fully guaranteed. First time ever for second-round picks. Do you see this as a problem? Were you expecting this at all? And how do you think teams are scrambling now to deal with this?
I think I wouldn't call it a problem so much as something that they have to work through. It's something that's been coming for a while. For instance, 2022, Boye Mafe had no guaranteed money in the 4th year of his deal. 2023, Derek Hall is drafted. He has $100,000 guaranteed in the 4th year of his deal. And so you can see the trend. And if you just look at, some of the picks in those years, you could see the trend coming that more money is going to need to be guaranteed in that 4th year. That said, it was surprising that the 4th year was guaranteed for these players. I can always understand if it's a quarterback. There's always a quarterback tax that you've got to pay. And there's always a little bit more in there, but a linebacker, not so much. So I think they're working through it. Joel Corey mentioned that they're working with one of the holdups might be Tyler Shug in New Orleans. Talk about the quarterback tax, saying I've got to get a fully guaranteed deal because I'm basically going to be the starter this year. So at some point anyway. So and he's kind of like the domino. Once they get that, then maybe some of the others will fall into place. But I don't see it as a huge issue for the Seahawks. They will work through it in time. And this is actually just like 2 years ago. Devin Witherspoon, if you remember, he was the last draft pick to sign his deal. And what it was is number 5, there were 3 quarterbacks that all got their bonus money right up front. And then Will Anderson got 85% of his bonus money up front. And the Seahawks are used to structuring the payouts of their bonus money. So when you sign your contract, you get a $10 million bonus. They don't hand you a check for $10 million. It's a check for $5 million. 9 months later, a check for $2 million. And then 9 months later, a check for another $1 million. So there was a little bit of a holdout with Witherspoon on that. But is anyone upset that he held out a little bit? He came right in and was playing very well.
Right.
Emenwari and Arroyo seem to have taken the bull by the horns when it comes to the rookie camps and the OTAs, and they're not just trying to slow play it a little bit. They're involved in every camp, and so let's
talk about how that works. Yeah, because I kid about the Bengals, but they've been kind of notoriously stingy about contract negotiations for quite a while now. So that it's not just a recent anomaly, but the idea that the reasons he is holding out and but yet, he's a mid-first round draft pick. The way the press reported it is mostly that he's concerned about injury guarantees, things like that. What if he goes and he practices and he gets hurt and what's he missing out on? And yet one thing that was also pretty consistently reported is, hey, Gray Zabel of the Seattle Seahawks signed a contract that had the same language in it, right? Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, as you mentioned, Emenwari, Arroyo have been taking part in all of the offseason program, including practice and minicamp and everything else. What kinds of protections do these rookies have for showing up and practicing before they sign their deal?
Well, there's a few different things that are going on. The first one is if a team drafts you, they're going to pay you. It's just going to happen. There's just no, oh yeah, we're deciding not to pay you now. There's nothing like that. There's a forward assumption that things are going to get paid. There's insurance. There's good faith. I'm sure teams have discussions with their draft picks that, hey, this is just a matter of getting things ironed out and getting things done. And so I think there'd be a lot of grievances filed if a player got hurt and then a team said, oh, no, we're not going to pay you.
Right.
There's a level
or
of
you just show up,
there.
you just show up and have a couple of bad practices, right? Like, we're going to lowball,
We'll pass. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So a lot of that is sort of played out in, what you really want as a player and how it works. And like Shamar Stewart, he's making a stand, and I think there's probably a little bit more to it. There's some void clauses that they want in the contract to be able to void some of the guaranteed money if he gets in trouble. And he's had some questions. That's why he was drafted at 17 right before the Seahawks.
Yep.
And so I there's a little bit of the Bengals being stingy. There's a little bit of him. Does he have a skeleton in his closet that's going to, spring up anytime soon that we don't know about? It could be the Bengals. Dan, the Bengals have drafted players with questionable histories for years. They've overlooked all kinds of, misconduct. And this kind of feels like they're kind of trying to shape things back to like with a really hard push to get a little bit more leverage on their side.
All right, let's get into some of this Cap 101 stuff so that people are familiar with the terms before we start sketching out contracts. First of all, when it comes to the Seahawks, I've never heard a GM talk about this as much as I have heard John Schneider talk about it, at least not until this offseason when John Lynch found himself talking about it a lot. But the idea of cash versus cap, that it's not just how much salary cap space is allocated every year to players total and then to individual players in vacuums, but also how much of that, it doesn't necessarily automatically mean that cash is handed out. As you mentioned with the bonuses, just because a player carries a $40 million cap hit doesn't mean he's getting $40 million in cash. John Schneider, last offseason, I believe, said that his mandate from Jody Allen and the way he's instructed to do business is that the cash has to match the cap. What does that mean and why? And because my understanding of what it means, and I'm sure I'm going to understand it better after you explain it, is that it sounds responsible. So then why do the Seahawks do it this way? And then why doesn't everyone do it this way?
It's a little bit of how you decide to run your business. Not, these billionaire owners, everybody does it a little bit differently. There's owners that are wild spending money. Jerry Jones comes to mind. Jeffrey Lurie in Philadelphia comes to mind, that are happy to. The others are more conservative. That's how it works out. And that's one of the things that I think fans struggle with a little bit because, well, they say it's $1 billion company. Why don't they just pay the player? And why do they have a cash budget? Well, that's how businesses run. That's how they're successful. And so what we come down to with that is, like we talked about, is structuring when you pay these things out. So you kind of help your cash flow. And, one of the things that's always going on behind the scenes is when you guarantee money, you have to put that money away in like an escrow account. And so if you give a huge guarantee, that's basically limiting your cash flow and writing a huge check. Now, the Seahawks have kind of danced around that with some of their moves. Most famously, we'll guarantee your contract for next year, 5 days after the Super Bowl. There's, $10 million that gets guaranteed. And well, that's when they write that $10 million check next year instead of this year when they initially sign it. So it's sort of a pseudo guarantee. So it's just managing your business. how you handle things. You might remember Khalil Mack was traded from the Raiders to Chicago a few years ago, and he was going to get a really, really big contract. He was going to break the bank for pass rushers.
Mm-hmm.
And there was legitimate talk going around the league that at that time, Mark Davis could not afford to put that money in escrow because it was going to be like $65 million.
Yeah.
And they were in the old Coliseum. They didn't have any cash flow, and they were causing all, they were just financially in trouble. And that's one of the things some of the legacy franchises struggle with, because all of their money is in the franchise. They don't have, I made $10 billion in tech over here, and so I've got plenty of money to work with. Not a lot of these teams, the legacy teams, have that kind of cash. So it's about managing, your cash flow, how you keep your books, and how you handle that. And then I would think there's really not been a lot of talk, but I would think there's a little bit of cash flow management in the name of the trust and perhaps selling the franchise in a few years. That doesn't mean they can't negotiate contracts and make good free agent signings. They just have to negotiate things a little bit differently, maybe a little bit more carefully. Even some veteran players might, your signing bonus or your free agent contract, you don't get it all right away, but you get it a little bit later just to help us out. And you're going to get the money anyway. And you've got $50 million in the bank, like DeMarcus Lawrence or Cooper Kupp. You've got $50 million in the bank. Can you help us out to work with us a little bit? And that way things kind of work a little bit behind the scenes. And then there's always some, like John Schneider has said, having that free cap to kind of go spend during the season. And during the season, he's done remarkable work with some of his trades in season.
Yeah. There's definitely an MO that the Seahawks have in how they hand out contracts. We know that they don't like to go as long as some teams are willing to go. They like to keep things to 2 and 3 years, even for their bigger signings that they've had over the last 5 or 6 seasons. They've all been 3-year deals. We saw a recent example of that, potentially impeding their ability to sign a free agent they really wanted in Will Fries, when they were only willing to go 3 years. Minnesota was willing to go 5. There was other factors there, obviously, with the whole medical thing. So that's not exactly apples to apples.
Yeah.
But these things that they do, they only go 3 years. They don't give you all your money up front. They do that February trigger date, which also can work as an escape hatch in case they want to move on from a player and they don't have to pay him that money. But it doesn't feel like if we step back and look at the whole thing, take away the Will Fries thing, because I think that was a very unique situation that had more to do with the injury and the medical situation. Yeah. It doesn't feel like it's ever gotten in the way of them acquiring a player they wanted to acquire or keeping a player they wanted to keep, has it?
No, I don't think so. There's been a lot of talk over the years as we kind of chew through things, and can they actually do this? Can they not? You remember when they signed Russell Wilson, it was the biggest contract, quarterback contract in the NFL. So it was a big deal. They signed Bobby Wagner for
Bobby's. It was the biggest one ever at the time. Yeah.
Big deal. Yeah. So they really never had a problem with that level. It's really, do they want to make that big splash? And so we've seen this year they've kind of changed course a little bit. DK Metcalf wanted to move on, and they didn't just, you can just buy a player out of his disagreement. I don't want to play here. Well, would $25 million a year change your mind? Well, sure. Right. Geno Smith, that kind of thing. That there was going to be some contention there with how much they're going to pay him. But it wasn't about the cap. It certainly wasn't about cash. So they've been able to make the moves that they really want to when they need to. So I don't think they've ever been really limited in that way. It's more by their strategies and by their, their principles that they stick by. Like you said, Will Fries with 5 years coming off a broken leg and, potential medical. I wasn't upset when I heard that's what the Vikings offered him. Yeah. I mean, I want to guard as much as anyone else. I want another season, and I'm ready to just overinvest in the offensive line financially. But when I heard that, that didn't bother me at all, because it sounded like something that the Seahawks would not do.
Yeah, it'd be one thing if this responsibility, this fiscal responsibility that they believe so strongly in, it'd be one thing if we felt like it was holding them back from competing. If it was like the team across the street from them, right? Maybe a little different story.
Yep.
You mentioned Geno. I hadn't planned to ask you this, but it's the first time we've had a chance to talk on the show since all that went down. The idea that he, left or turned down the Seahawks offer because he was insulted by it and he thought there was a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And then we see that, first of all, it took longer than we expected it to take in Vegas. And then the deal comes out and the guarantees are a little higher, but really overall, it wasn't that much different. Just hypothetically speaking, maybe I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but if they had just done that deal, from what you understand about it, compared to the Darnold deal, how much would it have impacted their offseason and kept them from being able to do what they did? Or given the fact that as we sit here today, they still have $30 million in salary cap available, could they have still executed the exact same offseason essentially if they had kept Geno at that deal?
I think very similar. They probably could have. They probably would have spent a little bit more money. I think over the cap had it at something like $21 million they could pick up with an extension. So, they picked up $31 million and they spent $10 or $11 million on Sam Darnold in his first year. So really it's close to a wash. It's not exactly a wash, but I'd say it's pretty close. So they could have kept that going. But the more I think about it, the more I think he just wanted to play with Pete Carroll in Las Vegas.
Yeah. I think that was evident.
I honestly think if he just said, hey guys, I really want to go to Las Vegas. Pete's my mentor. I love him. He loves me. What can we do? I think that would have been, something that would have happened either way.
I agree. If he felt strongly about staying here, his agent would have come back and counteroffered, and the fact that never happened. Let's get into one more term, and that's you've mentioned already, one of the commenters has is void years. We hear about this a lot. Up until Joey Lane showed up, the Seahawks had never done it except for the COVID year when they kind of had to sort of keep some things straight. Very simply, I think I understand what void years are. It's just tacking on extra dummy years to a deal so you can spread out the prorated signing bonus to lower the cap hits overall, even though you never intend to pay the player in that year. Joey Lane has used those. Mm-hmm. Not extravagantly so, but it seems like he's picks and chooses, and I think Darnold's has 2 void years, and that it seems to be about as far as they're going to go. This feels to me like a loophole that the league didn't anticipate when they negotiated the last CBA. Like, how do you feel about the use of void years, I guess?
Yeah, it's evolving over the years. I was happy that the Seahawks weren't investing on the credit card, so to speak, because when the void years, the contract runs out. So you've got a 2-year contract, but actually it's a 4-year, let's say, with 2 void years. The 3rd year of the contract is done. The player's a free agent. He can go, but that's just dead cap money.
Yeah,
that hits your books on the 3rd. So you're automatically putting dead cap money on your books. So it's an investment. It's a gamble, so to speak. There's an extra X factor in there. If you have a player that does that and he goes out, his contract voids, then he's not an unrestricted free agent subject to the comp pick salary. So, or the formula. So it's really, it's something that's, it's almost one of those things that's had to, the Seahawks, I think, have felt like they've kind of been drug into it. Like, your parents being drug into the 21st century with FaceTime and things like that. It's just, it's just so ubiquitous. Everybody's doing it. So it's something to, get an advantage of this year. In the piece I wrote, with Sam Darnold, they saved basically $4 million in cap space this year. So, you could plug in whatever player you want, like the backup Josh Jones, the backup tackle. They wouldn't have him if they didn't do that. Or, Jaron Reed's contract, or most of Ernest Jones's contract this year. He's like $5.25 this year. Yeah, they could do because they financed that money down the road. So in that way, I'm fine with it. I don't see it as a huge issue, but
because there's no limit to it, right? I mean, a team, if they wanted to, right, they could add 10 void years,
right, yeah,
right,
as long as the years are in the CBA. So as long as the CBA is active, so I think 2030 at the moment is when the CBA expires. So if you go to over the cap and click on the Phillies team page, you'll see the tabs for all the years that they have.
Oh, for the Eagles, yeah, the Eagles really like to do that, yeah.
And it's comical because they'll have like 4 years of players that have zero salary, and it's just void your dead money. So I think it's something that's the Eagles have played the system as well as anyone. They have an owner that's ready to go and willing to spend the money as a signing bonus, and they've done it well. And then there's teams that don't do it well, like the Cleveland Browns don't do it very well. They're stuck. They're really in a mess. The Saints have done well, but they haven't drafted well enough to keep up with it. So with all that spending, so it's something it's just like a credit card. Use it responsibly. If you use it responsibly and you make other good moves, you're fine.
And clearly the league is concerned about the Eagles because they tried to ban the tush push. And now there's talk that the next CBA negotiations, they might try and tamp down on some of this stuff, get rid of void years, maybe tighten up some of these things. All right. With the Seahawks specifically, big picture view, just how would you generally assess the overall health of their current salary cap situation?
I think they're in great shape. They really are. They have like $31 million right now, $58 million, $58 million next year, I believe.
50.5, yep.
Yep. So they're fine. They're in really good shape. So that's
to your void year point though. 2028, they are $29.7 million over the cap at the moment.
Right.
But that's only because the cap is set at zero.
Right. Yeah. So they're doing well. So when you combine the years, there's about 80, 85, $86 million of cap room. And they're in very good shape. I think one of the things that seems to be not missed, but lesser comprehended is they didn't extend Geno Smith. They didn't extend DK Metcalf. Those are huge chunks of money that are now open. And, when they cut some players that they got rid of, they had some, dead cap money. Now that's open. And so they don't have like a cornerstone, huge contract player that, oh man, how are we going to sign this guy? Otherwise it's going to be tough, sort of thing. So they've got flexibility. I feel like they've got a lot of flexibility this year if they want to do some of the patented John Schneider in-season trades, the disgruntled superstar, the Carlos Dunlap, the Leonard Williams, those type of trades where they can really, score a good player for not a whole lot and use the cap that way. So they've got moves they can make. They've also got flexibility with their contracts now with the players that are coming up. The 2022 class needs to start being planned for, well, by us. They've already done it, but in those contracts to sign. And when you use those void years, for instance, so 2026 is not going to be a terrible year if you sign all those young players, because the first year of the deal is usually lower and then it kind of graduates up. So by the time those deals get ugly, Leonard Williams will be off the books. Maybe Sam Darnold will get extended or he'll be off the books. Maybe, Jalen Milroe will be the starting quarterback by then. So who knows? But it's just a sort of a system of ebbs and flows. And so overall, I think they're in great shape.
And you used my favorite word when it comes to the salary cap, and that's flexibility. And anytime someone, I get into a conversation with someone that might be frustrated, the Seahawks only like to do the 3-year deals. My answer to that is always, well, but they can always be flexible too. They always can be creative. They can make these moves, as you said, mid-season, which John Schneider has done pretty darn well. You can criticize a lot of things about his tenure as you can with any long-standing GM. but mid-season, in-season trades have generally worked out pretty well for the Seahawks. And that's the kind of flexibility. I know that this offseason, there was still a lot of consternation among some fans that, hey, we've got available salary cap space. Why aren't we spending it? Well, that's one of the reasons why you don't, right? Is you want that flexibility halfway through a season.
Absolutely. And that's the hard part. It's kind of like, being patient, waiting for ice cream. It's really hard when you really want some ice cream to be patient. I've got the money, I can get it. Why don't I go get it? So, but there's intelligence there, like you mentioned, if a good player pops free and becomes available, you want to have the resources to be able to get them without having to, tighten your budget somewhere else in another area. So it makes a lot of sense just to sort of have the money. If no opportunity presents itself, that money doesn't disappear. You just roll it over into the next year, and you have even more to spend the next year. Yeah. So really it's up to it's a course of wisdom in my mind, because, like, for instance, the year they acquired Leonard Williams, they couldn't pay his salary. If you remember that, it was like $10 million, $12 million. So they plussed up the trade to the Giants and had the Giants pay his salary. So they ended up paying a second and a future fifth to get Leonard Williams. And there was a lot of financial concerns there. So if they'd had the cap space, maybe they could have gotten him for a straight up third, right? Or something even less, maybe 2/4. I don't know. So there's that. If you have that, then you can save yourself money everywhere. It's really it's about your asset allocation, if you want to use the accounting term. I don't have any money, so I'm going to have to spend draft picks to get this player.
All right, let's talk about some specifics, because the Seahawks do, as you said, the 2022 class, and they do have a number of young players that are eligible for extensions. Now, again, per league rules, you can be extended by your team in your rookie contract. You cannot be extended until the offseason before the final year of the contract. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with the 5th year option doesn't count, though. So Charles Cross, we know the Seahawks picked up their 5th year option. First time they've done that in a John Schneider era for a 1st round draft pick. So that was historical. They've also only ever signed a Seahawks drafted offensive lineman to one second contract, that being Justin Britt, who's not in the league anymore. Now he's running marathons. But it would behoove them, if they have the conviction that this player is someone worth extending, to do some of these things now, because, as you mentioned, they have some cap space now, and so you could use some of that now, or even save it and roll it into next year. But also because you can end up costing yourself some money if you wait, right? The Dallas Cowboys are becoming quite well known for this. They waited way too long to extend Dak. Now they're doing it with Micah. They did it with CD. They end up paying more because they don't do it ahead of time. I think the Bengals are guilty of that as well.
And then when you talk about, they can't do it right. They did Zeke Elliott. Yeah. They did it like 2 years early with Zeke Elliott, and that didn't work out. So they're not very good at it.
Yeah, and we'll talk about running backs here in a little bit, because that's kind of a different. We kind of set that off to the side. A little bit of a different equation, I think. But left tackles, It's long since been understood, one of the premier positions on the field. It's one of the positions along the offensive line, anyway, that the Seahawks have generally had good players at in their history. But Cross is a guy that I don't think anyone disagrees that they should try to sign long term. And he came out last week and said he wants to be here. Absolutely wants to be here. He represented himself as a rookie, which is a lot easier to do because everything's all formatted. He has now hired an agency. He would seem to be at the front of the line for who would make the most sense to extend now. What have you been able to glean, taking a look at the left tackle market, which compared to some other positions seems to have kind of leveled out a little bit, where some other spots just keep going up and up and up with the salary cap? This one sort of feels like it's topped out a little bit, which may be an advantage for the Seahawks. What type of deal could you foresee them making if they were to extend him now?
Well, I feel like with the 5th year tag, that was a smart move. It was just a very smart move on their part. With the tag, the way it's set up in the CBA is set on Pro Bowls. So it's on playing time, then it's on Pro Bowls. So if he had made one Pro Bowl in those first 3 years, that tag would have been $21 million. If he'd made 2 Pro Bowls, it would have been $24 million. So you can see why $17 million is really not that much. And so him not getting to a Pro Bowl kind of benefits the Seahawks that way. It's really, it was a move that was unprecedented for them. You know, the 5th year option being exercised. But you look at some of the contracts out there, and I'm blanking, the left tackle the Kansas City Chiefs signed. He had 5 career starts. He's a 5th round pick for the Niners, and he got $15 million a year.
Jalen Moore. Yeah.
Yes. And then Dan Moore.
Moore is a good year to be a Moore.
Moore brothers. Yeah.
Right.
So he went to Tennessee and got $20 million a year for 4, very average years that were not great. So, if he wanted to negotiate right now, they would save money. That's always the factor there. So, if they could talk him into something like between 17 and $19 million a year, that's probably something that could work out on both sides. I think the league has gotten smart, and I think the Seahawks have gotten smart in certain cases. Dan Moore getting $20 million is ridiculous. I'm sorry. That's just ridiculous. His last year, his passer rating on PFF was 39. He gave up 12 sacks. I think it was like the most for a starting left tackle. And they brought him in basically because they had to pay the Tennessee tax because they're one of the worst teams in the NFL. They're drafting a number 1 quarterback overall, and they've got to get somebody in there that could fill the spot. So will the league look at that and go, everybody says, oh, okay, I want that contract because that's what he got.
Right.
I don't know. The Seahawks aren't structure busters in the league. Like when Cleveland went and gave Deshaun Watson a fully guaranteed contract, Seahawks would never do stuff like that. Generally speaking, they would not do that kind of thing. I'll be very curious to see if they literally are negotiating this year or not, because now that they've added the 5th year, they have 2 years to negotiate, and they don't generally negotiate with players who have 2 years left on their contract. Now, that's a veteran situation. This is a rookie situation. Crosses, hopefully his best years are ahead of him. So there's a little bit of forward looking, and they may want to, and they may realize that that's where we're going. The floor is going to be $20 million, and if we could work something out now that's 17.5, $18 million, we should do it. So
it's interesting. Yeah, we live in a fascinating time in regards to that position, because there are very few, as I'm looking at the chart right now of what guys are making in that position. There just aren't a lot of left tackles in the league today that are objectively considered elite.
Yeah.
Right. Like you have Trent Williams at the top at $27.5 million a year, but number 2 on that list at $26 million a year is Christian Darrisaw. He's a good player. I don't think anyone would argue that he's an elite player. Laramie Tunsil has already been traded twice, right? You get down into some of those guys, and that's why it doesn't. After digging into this a little bit in preparation to talking to you, I won't be as concerned if they don't get something done before the season started for exactly the reasons that you laid out. Also, when you add the fact that we know Charles Cross wants to be here, his agents probably called him right after that, his little post-practice press conference the other day, and said, hey, maybe don't say stuff like that.
Yeah.
But you look at, just kind of where $17.5 million falls, and it's like 14th in the league. So even if he played on that next year, obviously you'd prefer him not to, because you'd like to reduce that. That it kind of puts him, he's right there with like Colton Miller and Garrett Bowles. These are all guys making $20 million a year. Ronnie Stanley, Taylor Decker, Deion Dawkins, Garrett Bowles. If that's kind of the market for a guy who's never made a Pro Bowl but he's younger than all those guys. If he got into the top 10, he'd be the youngest player in the top 10.
Yeah. And
that's the advantage he has. And I'm sure that's going to be something his agents are going to point out.
Yeah. And I mean, if you widen the lens even more and bring in all the offensive linemen, he's like the 31st or 32nd highest paid offensive lineman in the NFL.
Yeah, it's funny how guards are.
If you give him that 17 million a year for an average. So it's one of those things that, you and I, it boggles the mind a little bit with that amount of money, but it's not a record breaking amount of money. So it's something that they can play on if they feel like he needs that extra year to kind of prove where he's at. And I remarked, I thought he showed up to camp and looked remarkably more filled out, more muscle, more weight, which he's kind of needed. He's been an athletic tackle, but not like a power tackle, for lack of a better term. So can he take on a little bit more weight, balance that athleticism? Because if he can, he's going to step into that top 10 real easy.
Yeah. Some of the other guys that are eligible, Reek Woolen, Kobe Bryant, Boye Mafe, Kenneth Walker, Abe Lucas, a very unique case. We'll talk about him last. These other guys are all, I would put them all in that bucket of, I'll take one out. Kobe Bryant's a guy that I would like to see extended early. Mm-hmm. And it's not just because I think he's a great player, but I think he's found his role. I think the switch to safety was a career changer for him. Definitely a game changer. Safeties, that market's been depressed a little bit over the last couple of years. You can get guys at really good values. We've seen that right here with Julian Love. Yeah. In the first deal when they got him initially as a free agent, I thought was surprising given what he put on tape the first 4 years. And then the extension I thought was surprising. I feel like Kobe's a guy that you can get at a decent value if he wants to be here and also wants to sign up for some of that security, because he just seems like a guy that you can just run out there every Sunday or Monday or Thursday or whatever. And maybe he's never going to get all pro votes, but he's going to be a very solid foundational player for you.
Yeah. And there is a market that's starting to kind of settle or evolve a little bit as the third safety on teams, as they go more to that nickel type package where there's lighter, but a safety that can play the run game and then play some different roles. So like I was looking at, when you project a contract, you always try to look at, age, market, performance, things like that. We've got like Brandon Jones in Denver, Darnell Savage in Jacksonville. Mm-hmm. They're all kind of settled around $21 million on a 3-year deal with 10, 12, $14 million guaranteed. So that's a number that, that might be kind of a target for the Seahawks with Kobe. And the only thing though, with those contracts, all those ones I was looking at in that range, they all left their team to move on to another team and get that contract. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's something the league may be thinking, we can develop a safety. Safeties at times are failed corners, for lack of a better term, like relief pitchers in baseball are failed starters. So, he's not fast enough to be a corner in the NFL. Let's move him to safety, and you can get a guy in the 4th or 5th round. So, but if Kobe keeps making those plays and having that nose for the ball, the ability to strip plays, make turnovers, he could be a really interesting asset in the situation. We'll just see how they have to work it out with where they deploy Nick Emenwari, how they bring out Devin Witherspoon and some of the other players. But, a 3-year, $18 to $24 million contract, not out of the question.
And I apologize, just to back up for a second. Did you give me numbers that you kind of thought Charles Cross might be in the market for?
Yeah, I think $20 million is kind of where they're at right now. I think if they extend him next year, it'd probably be in the 22 to 24, maybe 25 million range when it comes to that. So yeah, I think that if they can get him for $17 to $19 million a year this year on a 3 or 4 year deal, I'd sign up for that. immediately.
Now, Rick Woolen's an interesting one because I'll put Boye Mafe and Rick Woolen in the exact same bucket because I think they're both players that have immense upside. I think they haven't come anywhere close to realizing their ceiling.
Yeah.
I think their ceiling is immense, that they could both develop into star players, but we don't see it consistently enough that I don't feel like either would be worthy of a huge contract extension now. Now, that's not to say that the team won't approach them and try to negotiate something and try to get value, right?
Mm-hmm.
Try to get them before, but then you run the risk of both of those players, because I think both of them are capable of doing this too.
Yeah.
If you don't extend them now, they can both go out and have a huge year in 2025 and then know that their free agent market is going to be substantial enough that they're going to want to test it.
Yeah. Rick Woolen is probably one of the Seahawks' biggest enigmas right now, because his next contract could be $4 million or $40 million. It feels like
Right.
at times.
Yeah.
You don't know where they're going to come through. And I agree. And Boye Mafe, I think the challenge with him is having a designated pass rusher. I mean, it hurts your value bad. If you're on the field, if you're coming on the field, teams, it could signal teams just, okay, run at him and you'll get your 5 yards and your first down. So it's very difficult. And Mike Macdonald has not been quiet about this. He's wanted him to be a 3-down player, and that's what has been holding him back. If there's a degree of completeness that you have to have at a minimum to be, your starting defensive end that can make a ton of money. Now, nobody says, Khalil Mack, oh, he's a great run defender first and foremost. No, he's a great pass rusher, but he's very adequate at run defense. Same with TJ Watt and Aiden Hutchinson and those guys. So there's at least a degree of competence there that Boye Mafe just hasn't reached yet. And then there's weeks where he'll disappear for 4 or 5 weeks. And it's troubling. It's not that, okay, the teams come in and they double team him. There's just he goes through streaks. If you look at the stat sheet on a game by game basis, there's streaks where there isn't much on his stat sheet. So
yeah, he's one of those players that just, you want him to do more and you want him to take over games. And I just never felt like, there were games, Reek's rookie year, I feel like the one in Detroit I'm thinking of, there were games where it felt like he completely shut down one side of the field and you could see that upside. But Mafe, I never felt like he's had that game in his career where he was just a menace from whistle to whistle, right? Which again could lead to the potential for a value. But if they don't see him as that type of player, then I think they let him play out the string.
Yeah, and it could be a situation like almost like Cliff Averill. When he was in Detroit, 2nd round pick, great in intangibles, physical play, 8-9 sacks, and he came into the right situation in Seattle and took off. So it could be a situation like that. But I get where I'm getting what you're saying. I'm agreeing with you on there may be a chance to kind of invest now and see where these guys turn out. If you can get a guy on, sort of a mid contract, there might be an opportunity to really, come out of this smelling pretty good. It just depends on, now that Mike Macdonald's had a year and change, coaching with them, seeing where they're at, can he take them to the next level?
Yeah. The one guy that I don't think we should spend much time talking about is Kenneth Walker, simply because running backs are tough anyway. We know that market's been depressed over the last few years. It's kind of, it's sort of almost become like the first round rookie slotted contracts where it's like, depending on how old you are and when you hit the market, like, here's your deal. Yeah. Just fill in the blanks. Plus he hasn't been able to stay healthy, and they have a deep running back room. I think the Seahawks could be facing a very, very intriguing next offseason, provided, because I feel like they're going to sign Cross this year. I do. And I think it'll happen fairly early in camp. There's a history of that, right? I went back and looked the other day, like the DK deal, the Julian Love deal, and there was one other. that was signed. It's basically the third week of camp or the beginning of the second week of camp, like right around July 27th or 28th. I guess that's the second week of camp. I just don't think any of those guys are slam dunks outside of Cross. And so I think it would behoove the Seahawks to let them go into a contract year, play their ass off, be motivated, and then you get to next offseason and you can pick and choose which guys you want to be aggressive about. And then guess what? If some of those guys walk, being as young as they are, coming off rookie contracts, still a lot of upside ahead of them, maybe they get some comp picks, because that's a game they haven't really played that much in the last few years.
Yeah. And I understand that. And sometimes, like I said, we're impatient. This is a good player. We should sign him. But sometimes there's value in having a hungry player on your roster and then having him make a problem for you. So I love good problems, having too many good players on your roster, who to choose from, who to sign and who to let go, maybe making a trade, things like that. So I think that's the next evolution of how the Joey Lane era, if you will, kind of unfolds. How do they handle these players? Because the 2022 draft is a great draft. Now, are any of those players like absolute cornerstones that you build a team around? Not necessarily. But when you get a Kobe Bryant in the 4th round, a Tariq Woolen in the 5th round, and they're starters for you, and by the way, both of them made a lot of money this year because they got snap incentives, and Tariq Woolen got a Pro Bowl incentive. So he's making $5 million this year. He's not on a $1.5 million contract anymore. So, can you translate that? And sometimes the best organizations in the NFL, Baltimore Ravens, are disciplined enough to let these guys go, let them get big money somewhere else, and then invest that $20 million in other spots on the roster.
And then Abe is an interesting case as well, because there's obviously the injury history. I mean, I keep saying it, but it took them a year to figure out what the injury was, and then it took a year to fix it and heal from it. I don't expect them to do anything early with him because of the injury situation, but we also don't know, because we don't know what they know, right? Like if they're 100% convinced, because Abe was asked this last week or 2 weeks ago, I think, when he spoke to the press. Somebody mentioned the infamous Pete Carroll chronic use of the word chronic.
Yes.
And when they were trying to figure it out and they didn't know what it was. And I remember that interview, and he even said it wasn't anything structural, it was very, very strange. But if, they see the scans, they see the x-rays, they've been with him through his entire, if they're confident it's not a chronic situation, it's not going to be ongoing or degenerative in any way, and it's fully fixed, then, maybe they'll surprise us.
Well, let me put a comp into your ear. So the Dolphins had Austin Jackson as a high draft pick on the offensive line.
USC.
2022, he missed all but 2 games with ankle injuries, and it was pretty severe. 2023, he was healthy and playing very well. It was either November or December 2023. Maybe 10, 12 games into the season, they signed him to an extension, 3 years, $36 million. So it was a gamble, of course, but they had seen the intel, they had health. The next year he did damage his knee and missed some games. So I'm not sure if that's a good example or a bad example, but I think it's worth exploring that if they see that in camp, he can handle it without having problems. He can do preseason without having problems. And then he performs to his potential in maybe 8 to 10 games. Like you said, getting that value, there might be real value there in saying, hey, how about a 3-year, $40 million deal? And let's go forward with that, because right tackles, right tackles are almost as expensive as left tackles now. And he's very
at the
good.
Top of the market. Yeah, they are. In fact, as we sit here today, there's 2 right tackles making more money than Trent Williams is on an average annual basis. Tristan Wirfs and Penei Sewell, who Penei Sewell on any other roster would probably be playing left tackle and not right tackle. and will eventually play left tackle, I'm sure, at some point in his career. But yeah, there's only 4 right tackles, to your point, that are making $20 million or more. And then it drops off into some pretty reasonable territory in that deal that you're talking about. Austin Jackson, that would put him 12th in the league, right there with like Rob Havenstein, Caleb McGarry. Yeah, that's interesting. I think he's definitely a guy that I would want them to keep if they're not concerned about the knee.
Yeah.
Because we need what he brings. I mean, I loved that interview he did last week. Some people were like, he seemed cranky. And I'm like, that means that Abe is back.
Right.
Like that's who he is. He's feeling good about himself again. If he's that ornery Abe Lucas again.
I love the Sam
we
Darnold
need some of
quote.
that nastiness.
The Sam Darnold quote was great. What do you think of Sam Darnold, or have you met Sam Darnold yet?
Right.
Well, we beat him. We beat him in college when we played him in USC.
Beat him when we were at Wazoo. Yeah.
Yeah. Great quote there.
Yeah.
So,
And you could certainly easily pay both of your tackles, which in some years might seem to be problematic. In fact, I remember when we drafted them both in 22, I thought, well, that's going to be a decision in 4 years. Right. But because you don't have any interior guys that you're going to have to pay significant money to for 3 years. Mm-hmm. So, if you look at the offensive line as a whole, absolutely you can pay both your bookends.
Yeah. And there's some staggering that you could do with the contracts with Cross's 5th year. Lucas doesn't have a 5th year. So there's a way you can make it work.
And to your example with Austin Jackson, if you did Cross early, you could do a later in the year and just and have it start next year, right? Because there are two. So let's talk about that for a second. There are 2 types of extensions. It isn't always when someone signed a new contract extension, that extension doesn't always start at the conclusion of their current contract, right? Sometimes some teams at times will tear up the last year of that deal and just fold it into the new one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just a negotiating tactic. What the player wants, what the team wants, and it's always really difficult to understand, because that's one of my first questions is when Adam Schefter breaks news of a big contract being signed. When does it start? Does it start after the end of the deal, or does it, like you said, does it start immediately there? So, there's good sides and bad sides. There's strengths and weaknesses to it. Like, for instance, both the Eagles and the Rams signed their quarterback Goff and Carson Wentz way early on their contracts. They were gone before the first year of their extension. They were on other teams. So it's always a game, and to me it's a fun game.
Well, and with quarterbacks specifically, it seems like that's been the trend the last couple of years with these big time franchise quarterbacks that are on their second deal, which is usually, it's always a massive deal. Is now you're seeing teams extend those and adjust those, way early. We've seen it with Josh Allen already. We've seen it with Patrick Mahomes a number of times. I think there's already some discussion about doing it with Lamar. It's just a real easy way to clear some cap space for a guy that is going to be around for a long, long time.
Yeah.
That you're not going to move off of. It kind of gives you that other wheel to spin. Let me do something before we get to some questions from the viewers. I have this shirt. It is a large from the merch store. One of my, right? See it there? You can't see it because of the green screen, but that is a blue and green logo. And so it came to me, and these shirts are cut a little bit large. So I usually wear a large. This one was like an XL or a 2XL on me. So I put it up to any paid member to say whether or not they wanted to be in the raffle. And so I've got my Blue Bunny ice cream here. And I've got all your names in here that have said they're interested. Oh, I'm going to do this on camera. So you see I'm not playing any favorites. All right. So hopefully they're in here. Oh, I'm sure they are. I'm sure this person is in the comments. Let me see if I can find them, and I'll announce it this way. Hold on. Is John McGrath here tonight? He almost always is. He has like 100% attendance. And of course, I don't see him here tonight. Well, anyway, John McGrath, I'll reach out to you individually if you don't see this first and get your address and all that. We'll be sending this shirt off to you. See there, just to prove it, just to make sure. I don't want anyone accusing me. John McGrath, congratulations. This shirt will find a good home with you, I'm sure. All right, let's see what some of the people have. James, thanks for signing up for a membership. Good to see you, as always. I did see one person popped in earlier. Not sure if they're still here. Always like to say hello to Bryce when he's here. Bryce Coots, how's it going?
Bryce, were you wearing a Seahawks Forever hat the other day? I thought I saw it.
No, I haven't sent. I promised him one, but I haven't sent it to him yet, unless he bought one on his own. But I don't think he has. Yeah, but he will certainly. Soon says, cool to have Curtis on the show. James asking a question that's been on the minds of a lot of Seahawks fans this offseason. Is there a possibility Walker gets traded so we get something back before midseason? Sure, there's a possibility, but I feel like the only way that this would happen is if some contender had a massive rash of injuries in their running back room. And through the course of the first half of the season, I suppose, theoretically, to fit this question, we were seeing some huge contributions from Zach Charbonnet, maybe some huge contributions, maybe a massive preseason from Kenny McIntosh or Damian Martinez. I feel like a lot of dominoes would have to fall for this scenario to come up. But certainly possible, especially if they think that they either don't want to extend him at the number that they think he would command, or that he's not interested in resigning.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's always difficult to see how running backs, the running back market is just so depressed compared to everything else. And like people were talking about cutting or trading Tyler Lockett a few years ago, and you get more with him on the field, paying him that salary than you would in trade. So I feel that way about Walker, that he may be nicked up and banged up once in a while, but we have invested in running backs, and having a stable of running backs is a great problem to have.
Well, with Walker specifically too, like as frustrated as I've been with his playing style, somewhat over the last 2 years, and the little injuries that he suffers, usually early in the season, I still, man, I want to see him at his best. I want to see Ken Walker have the kind of year he's capable of. And I feel like the infrastructure that the Seahawks have put in place this year on offense and all the changes they made have set it up with the coaching staff. And I think the most continuity we've had along the offensive line in quite a while, the play caller, the scheme, all of that he could be set up for a massive year. Like I've talked about it in terms of a Jahmyr Gibbs type season. Like we saw him catch 50 balls last year. He's going to be involved in the passing game. We've seen the explosiveness, and this scheme would seem to cater to his strengths, which is one cut and go. If he can do one cut, because he likes to do 27 cuts instead.
Right.
I'd hate to see him. That's why I wasn't in favor of trading in this offseason. I also didn't think it made a lot of sense because we were looking at a really deep running back class that was like 30 draftable running backs deep. And so I just didn't think there'd be a market there for teams wanting to give up anything significant. But it's because I want to see what Walker can do. And if he blows up and has a huge year and they feel like he's a foundational piece and it costs them a little bit more, okay, then that's the cost of doing business. But I'd rather see him do that with us than somebody else before we make that decision.
Yeah, I feel like that's the way to go. We talked about that earlier, is just maybe gambling a little bit on, instead of trading him or extending him this year, is just seeing what he does and then living with the consequences and deciding what to do in 2026.
Yeah, because from his standpoint, we might be seeing the pendulum swing back the other way, right? The value of running backs suddenly, when you look at like 2024, it's like, oh, some of these older running backs that changed teams on their second contract went out and had great years and proved that they're valuable. And now we're seeing the league kind of responding to smaller defenses, lighter boxes, and they're starting to get more physical and run the ball more. So who knows? Maybe he has a big season and doesn't sign an extension, goes into the free agent market next year. He may get more than that standard $8 million a year veteran contract.
Yeah. But I think that's with him. That's one of the situations that could work really well with a running back. Is the second contract doesn't have to be a 4-year contract with major guarantees. So there's things that they can do to work with him. Unless somebody goes out and just decides to blow the doors off the situation, again, another 3-year deal, maybe a 2-year deal even, or a 3-year deal that in reality is a 2-year deal kind of a thing would give.
And for a running back, if I'm a running back's agent, I'm encouraging him to sign the 2-year deal, right? Go get your money now and then get back in the market before you're 30. Like, try to cash in twice. I'm glad C Squawker asked this question, because I meant to ask you this big picture question. And I haven't, at least not worded the way that I intended to, but this gives me the opportunity. He says, anything that might jeopardize not re-signing Cross, JSN, who would be eligible next year for an extension, or Devin Witherspoon, also eligible next offseason, should not even be considered. Okay. I understand this concern, right? Don't give Mafe big money now or Reek big money now, because it might cost us a player next year. Is that true? Because I have been under the assumption, or I've operated under the school of thought for the last few years, that, some people like to say the salary cap's a mirage. I don't like that terminology, but almost anything is possible, right? Can the Seahawks, Curtis Allen, can the Seahawks sign all of their good young players the next 2 years, given their current cap status?
Yeah, I think they can. It depends on a number of factors that are outside their control. Does the player want to be here? Are there other concerns that we don't know about? Where's the market going, and do they want to sign here? So there's all kinds of options there that you can do. The thing that I love to do is I love to map out an offseason in my head and just, okay, draft this guy, draft that guy, sign this guy, sign that guy. You can't do that. In reality, you have to sort of play the board like a chess game with each move and counter move. So you can't say, okay, we're going to sign Abe Lucas in December, we're going to sign Charles Cross in September, and we're going to offer Tariq Woolen a deal. And, right. You can't say that. And so sometimes fans say, well, why didn't they just sign him? Why didn't they just do this or do that? And maybe they tried and the player said no. So like Jair Alexander, some people are saying, why didn't the Seahawks go get Jair Alexander for $4 million plus $2 million incentives? Well, he said he wanted to play in Baltimore. He wanted to play with Lamar Jackson. So, and as a cut player, he had the choice.
Yeah.
So,
said he turned down bigger money elsewhere.
Yeah.
We may never know if the Seahawks were in on that. I had some questions as to whether he fit some of their parameters and, would be a fit in some ways, but we may never know, if they were in on that. Because if we ask him, they're not going to tell us. So,
yeah. Well, the one bit of heat that I have to throw is if Trey Hendrickson is out there, they have a few young players going into their last year of their contracts that they could, hey, would you be interested in Boye Mafe in a part of a deal? So, and that would soften the blow of draft picks that they have to send. The Bengals would really be able to sell this to their fans. Here's an exciting second round player who's got loads of potential, and we've got him for a couple $1 million, and that's it. And so they could sell that very well, and so that might be an option. So, but I think they're more open to the different options than they ever have been, considering the last year they've had. So, who knows?
And we've talked about that possibility. I'm not so sure they wouldn't be open to it, because we do know that when they first had discussions with the Raiders about Geno Smith and even DK Metcalf was talked about at one point there before he was shipped off to Pittsburgh. But we know that the Seahawks initially asked for Max Crosby. So they are at least open-minded. They might have been doing that just to start really high, right?
Up. Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to ask for someone to widen negotiations, that's going to be the guy on the Raiders roster you're going to ask for. But it also, I think, indicated to some extent that they might be open to, an older, well, Crosby's not as old as Hendrickson, but a veteran player that they feel like is elite and would elevate that squad. Because that is the one thing on this roster that we talked about for multiple years now is a lot of good players. I heard one analyst today say a lot of Bs on that roster. Not many Cs or Ds or Fs either. A lot of Bs, but not a lot of As either. And we need to find some of those guys either from the current roster. Some of them, they need to either step up and be that guy or maybe go out and get one, right?
Yeah.
Micah Parsons is a little bit different deal, right? Because you're talking about a market-setting contract if you were to make a move for a guy like that. He's, what is he, still only 24, 25?
Yeah, he's young. He's versatile. There's a little bit too with him. He's very good. I'm not saying he's not good, but there's some bit of like branding almost with him being a Cowboy, being successful so young, and it would take something pretty massive. And if I had to guess, I'd say just what you said earlier. The Cowboys have every intention of signing him. They're just dragging their feet and costing themselves a boatload of money in this deal to make it happen. I don't think he's going anywhere.
Hendrickson, of all the possibilities, and I've talked about this recently on the show, he's the one that would make the most sense. Like it wouldn't be that dissimilar to what they did in making the move to get Leonard Williams. Getting a guy who's, Hendrickson's a year and a half older. He's 31 now. Williams had just turned 30, I think, or was about to turn 30 when they acquired him. Last year of his deal, they knew they needed to do an extension. The difference is that they got Williams, within a season, didn't have to worry about him holding out or not reporting. Hendrickson is saying he's not going to play anywhere under the terms of the last year of his deal. So anyone acquiring him would have to step up and sign a new contract. And then it's the Bengals again, and they just don't trade anybody. So
unless it's
Carlos Dunlap,
a backup center and a 7th round draft pick or something. So
they just had to have BJ Finney. BJ Finney, was that his name?
Yeah, exactly.
They just had to have him. To have him.
But the thing I like about Hendrickson is his skill set and the way he plays, his play style will age well. He's not one of those players that's like ripping off the edge and all of a sudden if he loses a step, he just disappears out of the league practically. He's a smart player. He's tough. He's disciplined. When you watch his sacks highlight reel, there's sometimes he just outworks a guy. He just won't stop trying to get to the quarterback. And if the quarterback hesitates, he's got him. So there's a level of that sort of that I can rush the passer, but keep my eye on where the ball is that a lot of players don't have. And I think Mike McDonald he'd just snap into that defense and be a huge part of it.
To
go down that road.
I think he exhibits a lot of Seahawk characteristics. Just his career arc, the way he just got better every year from, as you said, just working. The fact that he presents something that they don't currently have, like they just don't have. We talked about it in terms of Mafe. They don't have a guy on that edge group as much as we like all the guys in that group for different reasons. They don't have a guy that can take over games. They don't have a guy that's a headache or a nightmare for opposing coordinators. And he can just flat out beat guys off the edge in a number of different ways. As you said, it's not all just speed. He seems like that, old basketball player that goes and works on a different move every offseason, and he's kept adding to his tool belt and just the attitude and the work ethic and everything else, the motor. I think if it was any team other than the Bengals, he'd probably be re-signed by now. Yeah. But if they were at least reasonable at all about trade compensation and being willing to move him, I'll put it this way: the Seahawks have called. The Seahawks have to have called. There's no way, as much as they like to compete and talk about how they're in on everybody and any way to improve the roster, they've checked on Hendrickson. Absolutely. And if he is moved, I would put the Seahawks odds as high as anyone to be one of the teams in on it.
Yeah, it reminds me. I'm obviously a proponent of a move. It kind of reminds me of 2013's offseason when they had 2012. They had a good defense. Bruce Irvin was the only pass rusher. He was like the designated pass rusher, and they went out and got Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill somehow in the same offseason. And look at what happened. So it could be one of those things where he just makes everybody better. So now you've got to deal with him, and you've got maybe Harris on the other side, and you've got or Derek Hall, excuse me. And
Yeah.
you've got Byron Murphy growing into his frame in the middle. And Leonard Williams will have 3 or 4 games where he's unblockable. And so, you know, and then you've got this 6'3", 230-pound safety now that's running around at 4.38 speed. So, yeah, it would create a lot of problems.
Yeah, it'd be fun. Well, Curtis, it's always great to have your expertise on the show. I feel like I always learn something. I hope my viewers have too. And again, gave them a nice, worthy distraction from the NBA tonight, right?
Absolutely.
What do we basically are looking at 5 weeks of downtime here now before the camp, right? We always talk about the money stuff, and that's, that big brain of yours, but you're a fan too. Just
Absolutely.
Before I let you go, like, how are you feeling about the state of this team and what are you expecting in 2025?
I'm really excited. I really like what they've done so far this offseason. I think my taste has run a little bit more towards aggressive moves in the offseason, and they've kind of filled that taste a little bit better than they have in the past. So they cleared some talented players who for whatever reason have proven to be challenges, distractions a bit. And they've gotten back to their roots again as just being a good drafting team, having a lot of solid depth, and then striking when the iron's hot as far as getting players in. So I'll be very excited to see how they put the offense together. I think it's very interesting to see what they've done is the way they're just practicing the fundamentals in the camp. And that's all we're going to do is we're going to be really great at these 4 or 5 things through this OTA. And so when it comes to the regular season, they may be able to just kind of lean on a set amount of plays, run to set up Sam Darnold and have opportunities. So I think there's a lot of interesting things. And I definitely think the defense is going to take a step to the next level. There's going to be games where they're going to win the game because they're still kind of figuring the offense out and that sort of thing. And the defense is like, yeah, we got it. We got it. So,
well, that's the part about looking forward to this season. That's so comforting, I guess, is the way to put it. Is, the last 3 or 4 seasons, we didn't know what to make of either side of the ball.
Yeah.
Right. There were the perennial offensive line issues, not being able to run the football. And then the defense has just seemingly got worse every single year.
Yeah.
Those last few years under Pete Carroll and just at least this year, I almost haven't really wrapped my head around it still. I have to catch myself sometimes and go, okay, there's one side of the ball we don't have to worry about. Like
right.
they're going to be good at worst. Like their floor is good defense that keeps you in every game and gives you a chance to win. Now, what's going to determine how successful the season is how long it takes that offense to come around and what do they look like. But that defense should give them that opportunity to maybe withstand some of those early growing pains.
Yeah. And honestly, Ernest Jones might be the signing of the offseason in the NFL. Honestly,
still can't believe him. We got him for the deal we did.
No disrespect to Cody Barton, but about the same money as Cody Barton. Honestly,
it's crazy.
How did that happen? That's a master stroke. And if he has the same effect as he had last year on the defense, when he came in, things kind of snapped together. The Rayshon Jenkins was hurt. Kobe Bryant came in. There was a little bit of everything just sort of coming together. And if they can start back out on that track, they really got something.
I'm glad you mentioned that. It's probably a really great point to end on. If anyone out there is stressed about whether or not we can keep all these guys if we want to, like at the end of the day, not all of these players demand or command the top money in their position group, right? And sometimes guys just want to be there. And I talked to Greg Bell about this last week. I asked if he thought when Ernest came out and admitted last week that the little knee cleanup he had this year was something that's been bothering him for 2 years, and now he feels great. I asked him, could that maybe be one of the reasons he came at such a reasonable deal? And Greg said, no, it was all just because he wanted to get it done. He wanted to be here.
No.
And he wasn't going to play hardball. He just didn't want to, that was enough for him. everybody has their own idea of what they're looking for, what can give them the security that they want. But yeah, to be sitting there at $9.5 million a year, average annual value is like 16th, 17th in the league. I was stressed about getting that deal done. And then once it was done, it's like, what was I worried about?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't want to go anywhere.
I got to say, when we love watching what happens in the offseason following Twitter, when he came out and said, this is where I want to be. I love it here. I've relocated my family too many times. I want to be here, so on and so forth. Like you said, his agent's probably sitting in his office tearing his hair out. Right. And then I think it was either the next day or 2 days later, there was a very calculated tweet from either Schefter or Rappaport that said, Ernest Jones is going to be happy to play the field in free agency and see what his options are. And I thought, little protesting a little too much. So, and his deal wasn't done long after that, but still, what a great contract. So, and just one more quick thing with Sam Darnold.
Yeah.
His contract next year is set up real nice. Not just 2025, 2026. They have options. They have flexibility. They can, if they want the nuclear option to move on, they can do it, and it doesn't kill them. So they've got that. And then if he plays really well, they can actually do the restructuring and push some money down if they really want to go get some players and have another cheap quarterback year in 2026. So they've got plenty of options. Yeah, the future's looking good right now.
Well, I do have to apologize to the viewers and listeners. I was just tipped off that while everybody's been able to hear you really well, that apparently I didn't have this as my mic running through my mixer. And so the viewers have been listening to my camera microphone, and so it's probably not as good as it normally is. So I apologize for that. I just switched my camera out and didn't change the input. So nobody in the comments said anything, so they must have been happy with it. But shout out to Casey McLean of the Poor Sports podcast for texting me and letting me know. On that note, anyway, Curtis, it's always good to have you. And I will be back in town in time for training camp, so we'll have to catch up and say hello.
Absolutely. I'll be there for camp as many days as I can.
All right. That's Curtis Allen. You can read his stuff on the Seahawks draft blog from time to time. I'm Dan. Follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. All the different ways that you can support the show are linked down below in the description. My apologies for the microphone input issue, if that was a problem for you. Tune in tomorrow when it won't be. We'll see you then. Thanks for watching.